Hi everyone, my name is Eran Kinsbruner and I welcome you to this Star East virtual session, how to eliminate escape defects with a proven test automation coverage strategy. I am a chief evangelist and an author at Perfecto, over 20 years in the software development and testing industry, available in most social channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, and so forth. So feel free to reach out to me during and after this session with any comments, questions, or whatever you feel like. And with that, I just want to give a brief overview on the agenda for today's session. I'm going to talk a bit about, obviously the digital transformation, especially these days. I'm going to talk a bit about what's driving coverage, test automation coverage debates on a daily basis today, even more than ever. And try to prescribe for you guys a nice recipe for success in strategizing your test automation coverage to obviously eliminate escape defects within the cycle, obviously. If it's not within the cycle, that's the meaning of escape defects, obviously. And I will also give you some guidance. Some of this guidance will be with help of a good colleague of mine that recently did a nice webinar with me on how to ensure continuous testing suites value over time. And it also goes and drills down into what to automate versus what not to automate. So I'm really excited to drive this session. So in today's reality, and the fact that Star East is actually virtual, I think this is the first in many years that I'm doing a Star East presentation as a virtual event, but it means a lot. It means that digital transformation and digital channels needs to be always up and running, needs to be ready for prime time and for all other market specific events. And this means highly performing channels, mobile, web, and other applications. And I talk about quality, performance, accessibility, security, availability across multiple platforms. This is what digital reality means today. And businesses that cannot really adjust or haven't adjusted yet to the current digital reality are obviously suffering from business loss. That's the simple translation in today's reality. So you do want to keep an eye and actually close missing gaps in your digital strategy so you have a very fluent digital user experience for your end users. And by that, we also mean you need to have a valuable test automation throughout your entire delivery pipeline. If you look left versus right on this slide, this exactly shows the difference between a shift left or agile testing, continuous testing strategy, and a siloed testing approach. On the left side, obviously, you see a very late feedback going from either the users or the testing teams back to the developers, product owners, business owners. This is obviously a wrong approach. This is something that obviously does not come in line with agile testing. When you compare that to the right, I would say, and the recommended approach is when you have continuous feedback, you have the ability to test upon each and every code change, code iteration. You are able to automate in time, because if you are not able to automate in time per each code changes, obviously you are risking escape defects to production. You are creating a huge backlog of manual testing that results obviously in late feedback. So an optimized delivery pipeline means that you can increase your innovation throughput while increasing the quality of the output. The output, by the way, it's not a feature, it's value to customers, okay? Let's try and think about our software as value add to our clients rather than just pieces of code or functionality. We're looking here at value to customers that they consume, that they can consume in a timely manner. And if both of these things happen inside the cycle, obviously the time to market, time to value, and the cost are being reduced. So this is a very important analogy that you want to consider within your delivery pipeline. And if something is actually holding you back, either on the quality of the output or in the innovation, you need to understand whether it's an automation gap that you have, a skill set, a technology, or something else. But obviously, you want to optimize as you move forward your entire delivery pipeline and remove obstacles. That's a clear thing. But this is the required and optimized delivery pipeline. And what I'm showing you right now, this is the actual reality. In a recent survey that Perfecto conducted with Gatepoint, what we have learned is that, and we actually talked to very high-level executives in enterprises all over the world. We learned that these are among the key challenges that are holding back test automation maturity from surpassing the 50 or 60% test automation. If you have less than 50% test automation, it means 50% of the load is manual. It's done by test engineers late in the progress, and the feedback is also returning late. And by the way, this 50% is not a static number. It's something that grows as you add more value, more features, and more functionality into your product. So looking at automation skill set, this was one thing that obviously popped up in our research. Testing done separately or simply too late in the game. Advanced automation scenarios that cannot be automated due to either skill set that is connected to the first pane, or simply the technology is not ready or is unable to automate some of these capabilities. Looking at tests that are not being merged into your pipeline, okay? Shadow CIs. So this is also another pain that we have learned, that you have QA guys that are running their testing within a specific or side CI server, in opposed to a CI server that is used by the developers. Or in some cases, these test cases are not even getting into the CI pipeline and are just being executed upon other trigger, which is the wrong practice. You want to have all the high-value test cases being executed and triggered upon code changes through your CI. Another thing is the time spent on analyzing your reports. Organizations are spending too much time looking at test results and trying to make sense out of the test data. This is something that even if you have a good automation strategy in place, you cannot allow 72 hours or sometimes even more to just deep dive into these test execution results, Excel files, whatever. You need to have a very good quality dashboard that is always up to date and shows you actionable data, okay? Test environment was another one. The designed or not designed for testability of systems was another challenge that we have seen. It's quite important. The relationship between developers and testers, whether you are doing a BDD approach or not, can allow you to have better designed applications and features for test automation. Otherwise, you're just hiding a lot of code from your test engineers and also your developers, and this is the risk of escape defects. Lack of time to automate really ties back to the testing done separately, and maintenance is also tied to the automation skill set. So this is, in my mind, a very nice slide, kind of a reality check on where the organizations are at today when you talk about test automation maturity. Some organizations might have solved few of these pains. Some of them are still struggling. Some are looking into the famous test automation pyramid, and trying to maybe automate more on the lower level side of the pyramid, like the unit and the API test cases, eliminating a lot of flakiness from the UI level. Even though UI is quite important, you can obviously optimize between these levels and make more robust automation. But at the end of the day, this is the current reality. So how do you look at test automation coverage for a successful and I would say delighted end user experiences? So you need to have a proper balance between both the test cases that you have and the platforms that you have. So if you look at test automation coverage, it's two sides of the same coin, because at the end of the day, if you have enough test cases but you're not running them on the right platforms, you are risking quality, escape defects on a specific platforms or few platforms that you haven't tested. On the other hand, if you are testing on the right platforms, but you're not fully covering the key business transactions, or the same thing happens, right? You have the risk of escape defects. So you want to have a clear balance between both the platforms under test and the business test cases or the test scenarios that you have that can run in parallel across all of these platforms. So one goes hand in hand with the other, and that's, in my mind, a key important point for you. If you want to take one thing from this presentation, actually you should take more, but if you want to take an important piece of this presentation, it's this slide, because this is something that a lot of organizations that I'm engaging with are failing in, because you get it right in one version, you get it right in the second version, but when you add more and more capabilities into your application and you're failing to pile up your test automation coverage, or you're not updating your test automation environment with the lab configurations, you're losing, okay? So this is a continuous validation, continuous maintenance for your test automation coverage strategy that needs to happen in order for you to have a good digital strategy, okay? So this is very important. So with that, let's talk a bit about digital test coverage, in details. And I'm going to divide, as in the previous slide, I'm going to divide the conversation to platforms and then to test automation scenarios to actually give you, like the previous slide suggested, the two types of testing that you want to implement and maintain as an ongoing practice, but each has its unique strategy. You want to have a good strategy on how to cover the different platforms, and you want to have a strategy on how to cover the right test automation scenarios. 1 + 1 gives you obviously the 3 that I'm talking about, which is the digital user experience. So let's start with the digital platform strategy, and this is where you kind of divide the different platforms, permutations, mobile, web, and so forth, across the different phases in the life cycle, okay? You're looking at unit testing, build acceptance testing, regression and non-functional testing, functional and non-functional, and production monitoring. You can see here that the differences are between the persona that is doing the testing, the trigger activity that launches the test cases on these platforms, and the phase in the life cycle. This is how, in my mind, you can and should ramp up your test automation activities. When you're doing just basic feature implementation, where you need a lot of debugging, you can use one device or emulator, simulator, okay? Or 1 or 2 different desktop browsers that are locally, and they are triggered through committing a new code to your local branch. When you are integrating, and this is the next bucket, into your CI servers, your code, this is where you want to kind of connect to the real world, okay? You want to see how it works from an integration standpoint with other features, and this is where you need the real production environments. You want real devices and desktop browsers. You maybe want to scale up a bit your target platforms so you get the feeling on user experience, API functionalities, and many more across different platforms and permutations. Obviously, when you're nearing your production environment, you want to scale as maximum or to the maximum. I'm not talking about 100% market coverage, but at least, 75, 80% of the market usage should be covered on your lab, and you get it either from your own dashboard and analytics, or you can get it from reports like even Perfecto is producing, called the device index, okay, the digital test coverage index report. It gives you kind of a nice recommendation of devices and operating systems, as well as browsers, to test on across these different phases. So this is one side of the story, but it needs to very much align to what is happening in the market. We are looking here at least 6 different OS families on the Android platform, with 3 to 4 operating systems, iPad OS and iOS, that are relevant to the iPhones of the world. So we are looking here at least at 10, maybe a bit more different device OS permutations. And why do I talk about 6 or 10? Because even for these 6 different operating systems, starting with Android 10, which by the way is already around 12% market share today in the market, Android 9 is about 29 to 30% of the market. So you see massive operating systems with coverage across multiple Samsungs and LGs and other devices in the market. But the thing about these different platforms is that each and every, specifically Android, has a unique custom operating system implementation. Okay, you can see the different variances that we have here that, these Samsungs of the world are taking the best base stock operating system from Google, and they are customizing it into a different image, if you like, that is installed across these different devices. This is why it's quite important to test at least across these different OS families, because you never know, okay? Assumption is a very, very risky word here, and you're simply going to, or you need to test your application on a specific operating system family. Whatever you're going to test, like, for example, on a Samsung S8 with One UI operating system, it's not the same package, it's not the same image that is going to be installed on a Samsung Galaxy S20 or an older Samsung Galaxy S7. These are all totally different operating systems. They have different features, different capabilities, and different performing options on the graphical GPU and stuff like that. So you want to have a very solid coverage strategy that takes into consideration these different OS families across the different devices. The desktop web is not really much different. You can see here how it's being divided across multiple browsers, operating systems, and you can then differentiate between Windows and Mac OS. But these are all valid permutations that I strongly recommend for you to validate over time. This is taken from StatCounter website. You can see other resources as well. But obviously, Chrome and Firefox are releasing on a monthly basis a new version of their browsers that are not just installable on different Windows OS, but are also supported on Mac OS. So you see the plethora of different configurations that you want to consider when you're building this digital lab coverage. If you do not, want to visit StatCounter and any other website on a daily basis, you can either take the index that I mentioned earlier, or you can simply go to some of the Mozilla and Chrome wiki pages and download the schedules. The schedules are quite solid. There can be deviations from what you see right now on the screen. Sometimes you will see either a delay in one of these browsers releases. Sometimes it will be even earlier. I was just surprised that this week Edge released a new version of their browser, and they actually skipped Edge 82 and just moved forward to Edge 83 beta. So things can change, but in general, this is quite a robust calendar that you can use to plan your digital test coverage on the browser phase. If you look at the index report, this is embedded in the index report as well as on mobile side as well. So for the mobile devices that are being released together with the operating systems, we also have a calendar that you can use as part of the report. So this is just to summarize, if you like, the digital platform coverage, the first side of the coin. We talked about platform coverage and automation coverage. So from a platform coverage, these are few things to consider on the mobile and web browsers. This is, by the way, a more solid calendar that takes into account not just the Firefox, Mozilla, also Chrome, Safari, Edge, and other desktop operating system releases, as much as we know today. If you try and summarize, everything that I've just said, and you're trying to put it into a Perfecto, this is what we call a Perfecto mobile testing pyramid, but it's built on top of the standard test automation pyramid. You can see that the table that I presented earlier showing all the different phases in the life cycle, I'm now just putting also the different types of devices that you can apply on this pyramid, comparing real devices with virtual devices like emulators and simulators. And you can see that as you move from the unit level towards the integration and obviously to the production and production monitoring, we are starting to mix real devices with virtual ones to expand the coverage, expand the fast feedback that you can get from these platforms, and also get more reliable quality released to the to the public. So this is how I would differentiate between real devices and virtual ones across these different types of testing. Again, unit testing can still live in the virtual world. It's perfectly okay. But when you move to the integration, you need to start mixing. This is the P1 test cases for my previous table. And we go on and on. When you move to this level, you can only rely on real devices as your end users are to get real quality visibility. Now we're going to move to the test automation specific coverage, which is the second side of the coin that I mentioned earlier. And here, again, we're looking at the test automation pyramid, and nothing new here. I still totally recommend to have the proper balance between each and every level here, depending on your applications and skill set within the organization. If you have the ability to automate more of the unit and the API test cases and reliably automate UI test cases that gives you enough coverage on the different digital platforms, as I suggested in the previous slides, this is fine. If you believe that you have a more complex UI, that the API layer or the API test automation wouldn't give you enough confidence, you need to expand more on the UI layer and add more test cases. It's on a case-by-case basis, but obviously the reliability and the maintainability of test cases obviously decreases when you live in the API and the unit test level. So as I mentioned, just recently I've done a nice webinar with my colleague and friend Thomas Aver, and I could have created a separate slide, but if I already have this amazing slide for my colleague, I decided to actually use it. And this is a nice set of strategies on how to select the test automation for your organization. And you can see here the different considerations. When you talk about strategy, you look at the technical skill set that you have within the team or teams, the scope that you want to automate, the objectives, okay? What do I want to achieve from my test automation project, okay? Do I need a larger set of testers and test automation framework with different abilities? Can I use what I have right now, leverage stuff that I have? What is my scope and criteria for my project? What is the timeline that I have, which also implies the differences in what you see on the screen here. This is the schedule. Frameworks and tools, in-house, external, open source, commercial. How much is going to, how complicated it's going to be for me to create and maintain an environment for my test automation. These are all part of strategic conversations that test automation managers, leaders, and also developers need to have prior to writing their first test automation scenario, okay? Designing the test cases is one thing, but implementing them needs to follow a solid strategy, and this is one example of the strategy considerations. And as mentioned earlier, there is a cost of maintenance and value or versus value to the business. And what do I mean by that? When you automate, again, on the lower layers of the pyramid, this is fine. It gives you a lot of value, and it's less flaky, and maybe it's less complicated to maintain. But in general, my point behind this slide is not to repeat, the test pyramid, because the point is quite clear. I'm talking here about continuous value over time across these different three layers. Whatever test cases that you are automating, regardless of the nature of the test cases, even if they are in the API layer, you want and you should continuously maintain them until you retire them. So this means you want to be very, very rigorous in the process of deciding what to automate, in which level, and how you're going to maintain the test case as your product and platforms evolve, change, mature, and so forth. Because each of these test cases are going to be piled up in your regression suites, in your CI, and so on and so forth. So this is quite important. So what should you automate? Going back to my friend Thomas, these are few really good examples, and each and every one of you online can decide on a different strategy, or you can add to this strategy, but these are very good and real life considerations that we have learned, myself together with Thomas and many other practitioners and thought leaders in this space. So is the task or task going to be repeated, and how often? This is very important, okay? When you start to automate something, if it's going to be done once in every sprint, it's very important, right? This is a repeatable test case. You don't want to do it manually. You want to invest in automating it, and you want to make sure that it's very reliable and easy to maintain over time. If it's something that is not really on a critical path in your application, it's only being validated once in every, few months, no one is going to touch it from a code perspective. It's in a very specific area. Maybe doing it manually once in every few releases would make sense. Keep in mind, a sprint of a week or 2 weeks, this is the reality today, doesn't give you too much time to go back and redecide what you're going to execute. You need to have a very good golden test suite that you can pick and choose from. And if it's too large, maybe it's wrong. How much time could be saved? This is the value, okay? I'm not talking here about ROI. I'm talking about value to the organization. How much time can I save the business, the developers, and the entire project by automating a specific test case? Are the requirements and everything that is related to the test likely to change often? If it's something that is changing every few weeks or even earlier, it's going to be a mess to maintain, and maybe it's not going to bring me the value that I need. This is very important. And by the way, you can still think about automating it, but definitely do not include it in the CI, because a CI scheduled task is not often being evaluated, at least not on a daily basis. And if there are changes to a test and you are still including it in the CI but didn't look to maintain it, you are either losing value or you're going to break something within the CI because the test cases are outdated already or simply broken. And there are some other few steps here, or few recommendations on what to automate, and I will leave it to you to pick and choose from this. I would actually recommend take all of these and maybe even build more, but these are some of the core considerations that I would recommend for you to look when you're strategizing your test automation coverage. So if to look at what we have discussed up until now from both a digital test automation coverage and a digital platform coverage, I've collected the following golden rules, okay? Just to summarize, because we have gone through a bunch of slides, talked about both platform coverage on mobile and web. We talked about what to automate, how to strategize your test automation based on tools, skill sets, product requirements, schedule that you have, etc. So if you combine the platform and test automation scenarios, you'll end up with these 3 golden rules. So this is a nice summary for you guys. A, from a platform coverage perspective, try and leverage market data and keep your lab up to date as much as possible with what your customers are actually using. How you can do it? I gave you a few tips and tricks in this presentation. 1, use calendars, both for web and mobile. See and predict what's happening in the market and do the adjustments to your coverage and your scripts. Okay, think about the lab. The lab is just an enabler for fast feedback. You are actually driving all the test automation through a data provider. Can be TestNG, Maven, whatever project that or code and other generators that you are using to get the test cases running. So you want to make sure that everything is up to date from test generation until the lab back to your report. Follow market events, okay? I often see even my clients sometimes that are not always up to date. A new browser version was released, even if it's a beta. Betas today are public versions like any other GA, okay? Whether iOS 13.4.5, which is now in beta, is out, you should care about it because your users are entitled to download a better version and use it. Maybe they are taking a risk, but if they are deciding to go with better versions, like on the browsers, and by the way, I'm using the Chrome and Edge browsers on a beta version. It works fine. I'm taking a risk here, but I still expect that the functionality will be working for me at most of the times. So you want to also consider market events, follow releases of operating systems, as well as platforms. Obviously, validate through your analytics, through your business, what's happening, what are the top usage in your platforms, both web and mobile, and fine-tune your lab accordingly, okay? There is no one single month that shows the same traffic that you used to see the previous month, okay? In a quarter, you might see some important changes on traffic. Maybe a new platform became more popular than the other. One platform wasn't used maybe because it has defects. Leverage web traffic analytics and analysis so you can understand what's going on in your production, okay? And also match your coverage to historical defects. This is a very important point. And I'm saying it because if you have your defects, whether they are managed in Jira or other defect management system, you need to see that you have specific test cases that are running as regression on these platforms, okay? Otherwise, you may wake up through the App Store or other production event, popping these bugs again, because this is a very error-prone area or error-prone device for you. So keep in mind these historical defects and see that you are covering them correctly. The second point in these golden rules, these three golden rules, is continuously maintain and validate your test automation suite. A test automation suite is as good as it is developed upon a specific software iteration. A 1.1 version that follows the 1.0 might not be exactly the same. It shouldn't be exactly the same. And this means maybe your test automation suite needs to change. And sometimes it can change dramatically depending on the scope. So you need to have in place an audit per each iteration that looks in your test automation, goes back to the reports, and understands what needs to be fine-tuned so you continuously validate your code against the right test cases. Otherwise, again, you're just wasting time and resources chasing an old code implementation that is not the one that is going to be released. That's kind of a clear thing, but time sometimes causes organizations to lose track on the test maintenance, which is important, leaving a lot of outdated activities being executed, whether in the CI or outside the CI, it doesn't matter. You're simply not testing the right things. And lastly, spread your test automation execution throughout the pipeline based on these things. You know, we have the persona and the skill set, we have the phases in the CI/CD, we have the software iteration scope. Each iteration has its unique characteristics. This is what needs to reflect how you're managing the test automation strategy or coverage, if you like, okay? It needs to focus on these different considerations. And again, no one software iteration is similar to the next. You want to fine-tune, rebalance your test automation coverage strategy based on what's happening in your development lifecycle. So just to summarize, these are, in my mind, three important golden rules to eliminate escape defects to production while combining both market data in the digital platform coverage area and strategizing your test automation coverage on the test automation coding area. And if you want to look at a real-life example, so this is how a pipeline testing coverage looks like, and you can see how, you know, going back to my point on distributing, the third point in my previous slide, how can you distribute test automation suite based on different triggers and different schedules. So one of our clients actually is looking at smoke testing, okay, that is run upon each and every pull request. These guys are doing 7 concurrent pull requests a day. So a smoke testing is done here, and they have a requirement to provide 10-minute feedback, okay? They have a 10-minute window to get the right feedback with the highest valuable test cases on the right platforms back to the developers. Think about everything that I've just said up until this slide, put it into to action in this bucket of 10 minutes with both sides of the coins, platforms and test automation coverage. At the end, or a second cycle or type of testing that they have in their strategy is a noon build, okay? When they're having lunch, they want to have 1 hour of execution, which gives them feedback before 1 p.m., before they're going back to their desk, just to eliminate additional risks, maybe to expand some of their coverage, okay, and get more risks eliminated from the entire activities in the pipeline. And this leaves a lot of, I would say, confidence to the regression that will cover the top 80% platforms that they have, whether it's browsers or devices, running once a day. But think about that. By the time you are running the regression overnight, smoke testing and build that was happening noontime, which was executing a subset of test cases, were already performed, eliminating a lot of the risks and maybe addressing some of the risks prior to the nightly regression. So the following day, you already are in a much better place to move forward with your activities, the next user stories or story points and whatever. So with that, I would like to summarize this session and with a short introduction to Perfecto. So for those of you who are not familiar with Perfecto, Perfecto is a cloud-based solution enabling you to create, execute, and maintain, manage, and analyze test results in the cloud for both mobile as well as web applications, supporting all types of mobile devices in 11 different data centers. We have over 10,000 different device OS configurations all over the world. We support all types of different desktop browsers that I mentioned also in the previous slides, the Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Firefox. And we have all the different abilities to automate your test scenarios with Selenium, Appium, XUI Test, Espresso, Protractor, all different open source flavors, including codeless record and playback Selenium capabilities. So I recommend to check us out after this session at perfecto.io website. And as mentioned, if you have any question, now it's the right time to answer them. And feel free to also approach me after this session for more engagement and conversations. With that, I would like to thank you for attending the session, and I'm ready to address any questions that you might have.